Welcome and good afternoon from the University of Warwick to Utopia Week. For those of you who are new to the Utopia Alliance, a brief introduction. Utopia is an alliance of 6 universities from Belgium, Paris, Sweden and Slovenia, Spain and the UK. Our purpose is to create a European university and an inclusive student experiences fundamental commitment for the Utopia project, and a group of representatives is leading this work from the 6 universities. Understanding and analysing how different universities are approaching inclusion and the different factors that define it are a priority area of our work. And to help us in this quest, we've invited our audience and a hugely experienced panel to contribute to the conversation of a common vision and experience of inclusion. My name is Kulbir Shergill and I'm the Director of Social Inclusion at the University of Warwick. And our panel today are Dr. Marija Sobočan, who's the Assistant Professor at the University of Ljubljani. She specialises in ethics and social work, as well as diversity and inclusion. Ljubljana is one of the Utopia partner universities. I'd also like to welcome Professor Lieve Brande, former Principal Administrator at the Directorate-General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion for the European Commission. Lieve is also a member of the Utopia Advisory Board. And finally, Professor Binna Kandola, a business psychologist specialising in diversity and inclusion, a subject he has written about extensively, and he's worked globally with major organisations and universities. Welcome to the panel. An inclusive culture is essential for people to achieve their potential, to be creative and to be innovative by leveraging diversity of thought. This is what research tells us. And this is what businesses aim to achieve to help them to be the best employers and the most financially successful companies. So to our panel, I put the question, what does inclusion mean in the higher education context? And what role should universities play in wider societal conversation about inclusion and diversity? Binna, can I come to you first?
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel, Kulbir. Yeah, as you said, most of my work is with corporations, and the definition we have of inclusion is creating a culture which effectively incorporates differences without eliminating them, and in which everyone can flourish individually and collectively as a high-performing team. So in a corporate context, it would kind of saying that individuals can be themselves, but it's not just for the well-being of those individuals, but we know there's tremendous benefits for people's well-being, but it also enables organizations to be more effective as a consequence of that. When it comes to universities, I think it's actually creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, and they feel that they will be treated fairly, so that they can fulfill their potential whilst this is the students primarily, whilst they're studying there. And key to that is this concept of psychological safety. It's really key to this. So the definition I like is it's about 30 years old now. Pearn et al. Is their definition. And their definition of psychological safety is the feeling of being able to show oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status or career. The feeling of being able to show oneself without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status or career. So just being able to speak up, to speak your mind, to tell people how you're feeling, to critique ideas. And of course, that's what we want universities to be about. But when it comes to a point about inclusion, how safe do people feel discussing things that may have happened to them, which may have been unpleasant and distressing even? How safe an environment have we created where anyone can speak up like that? And that concept of voice is really critical.
Thank you, Binna. Lieve, so listening to Binna's kind of description there of being able to be yourself, this kind of sense of psychological safety, which, you know, I know that has been very important in terms of the work in business and local government, etc. Lieve, how do you see this playing out in universities? Do you think there are differences?
Yes, hello. Nice to also be part of the panel and to go into interaction with you all. I would like to fall back also on a definition that is used in higher education, where it is very much connected to diversity. But lately also in the new publications by the European Commission being very widened to have a focus on inclusive environments. And of course, those inclusive environments should be enormously safe and must be inclusive for all. And that link of equity and diversity for all is really wide. That does not only mean underrepresented students or learners, but also learners that are not so traditional to the higher education. I'm referring to adult learners or lifelong learners. A recent report, 2 days old, by Eurydice has, however, shown that in the higher education, all those dimensions that are already been indicated are very slow in their take-up. And I think this will come back into the panel discussion. And for sure, two important messages there next to the ones that we have on age and gender and so on, is the fact that indeed the more adult learners are not very much approached, or are there but not very visible, and that the links with the learning informally and non-formally, that what is also very important is not taken up so much. So I think that's very interesting to look to that report and to maybe reconsider the definition in light of the very slow take-up of what we call inclusion and diversity in higher education. And that is, for me, having been working 32 years at the European Commission, in a way a disappointment that it is so slow to take up. I do understand what is happening, but we should be able to accelerate that.
So, Lieve, are you saying that the definition of inclusion within higher education has been too narrow, and that in itself is kind of restricting the take-up, that we really need to broaden it out to kind of include, you know, older students, so adult learners, and really looking at very different kind of aspects of diversity?
I don't think it's a matter of definition. We can have, of course, a discussion about the definition, but it's about the implementation and execution. And personally, but that's a personal view, is that for me, inclusion is a 360-degree implementation or action plan. That means that the slowness indeed depends on the fact that you have to bring it into the mind. It must be a mind shift, and it must be fully absorbed by the ecosystem, and this by all stakeholders. And that is not a rapid process. I don't want to talk about transformation or revolution. It is a steady evolution. So the problem is there. The absorption by the systems of something that is so important. They have identified, they have defined it, but to implement it, it's another matter.
So that slow kind of cultural change, I'm sure we'll pick up on that in the conversation as we go on, actually. So Anna, if I could just kind of turn to you and get a view from yourself in terms of what you think inclusion means in higher education, and also to come back to that, the second part of the question, which is, you know, what should the role of universities be in terms of that wider conversation in society?
Yeah, thank you so much, Kulbir, for the question and also for inviting me to this panel and being able to discuss these important issues in such an esteemed context. First, I'd like to just chime in on what Lieve just said now. I think neither diversity nor inclusion are static concepts. They cannot be identified and defined once and for all. They cannot be universally applicable and relevantly just one single definition. Also, they cannot be understood from a dominant perspective or a place of hegemonic epistemic position, meaning that their understanding and value and impact can only be described from a place of lived experience and theoretical insight that by definition takes on an intersectional approach and actually brings together, is combined with implementation, as was just now stressed. And therefore, I think our understanding or agreement on what is inclusion must constantly be scrutinized, challenged, must be developed and tested, must be implemented and then tested again, and then challenged again and improved again. And in essence, I think defining inclusion is about maintaining a continued, reflective and focused conversation between very different agents and contexts, actually, meaning also inside the university, but also outside of it, with the broader context in which actually the university is localized and in which it lives and interchanges with. So, meaning that in this process, only in such a process, the working and ever-changing definition of inclusion can be co-created. Of course, this is not easy because in the process, the different voices must be heard, and actually also a consensus between all these voices must be kind of found to create a common understanding that can then more successfully be implemented at different points actually in the life of the university. It's not just from one point that it can be implemented, but in many different areas. And we must constantly kind of recheck, have we tried in every single place? It must be present everywhere, I would say. But nevertheless, I think it's worthwhile and I think it's necessary to do this, both from a very practical point of view and also very theoretical kind of reflective process.
Thank you, Anna. So, Binna, if I could turn to you, you've written kind of and spoken extensively about organisations' tendency to marginalise the issue of race when developing strategies around diversity and inclusion. And I turn to this because obviously I think this is very uppermost in our minds at the moment, particularly following the death of George Floyd and the events following the Black Lives Matters movement. I think we've seen organisations making anti-racist statements and a lot of recruitment of D&I posts. Binna, do you think that organisations now will take racism more seriously? And will it change how organisations actually approach inclusion?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I'm very heartened by the fact that there's been a lot of soul searching going on by many people in positions of authority, particularly kind of thinking, how did I miss this? I didn't realize it was so bad. There is and I think my interactions with organizations actually I tended to say that's happening in British corporations. I think there's a lot of soul searching going on in continental European organizations, but there's a tendency to think that the racism doesn't exist here. It's not now, it's in another place. So it's another place, it's another individuals, it's another time even, it's something to do with the past. Basically, people are saying it's not here, it's not now, and it's definitely not me. And there's this tendency to keep pushing it away. And I think that universities, back to Anna's point actually, about we need to test, refine. What was our understanding of inclusion? And for a long time, our understanding of inclusion incorporated some groups and not others. And now that our definitions, implicit or explicit definitions, are being tested. And we need to kind of think, okay, we may not have given this the attention that it deserves, so we need to refine it and move forward. And something else will happen. But I like that idea actually about test, refine. I think we're being tested at the moment. And we need to kind of think, we all need to think, you know, what does this mean for our students? What does it mean for our staff? For universities, actually, the extent to which we have minorities at senior levels, particularly at all levels of universities, but particularly in the professorial posts. What does that mean about our recruitment processes? We're testing. It's testing, and then the real whether we're learning the lessons a lot is actually do we then refine. I think that process of I'm optimistic. I think that process of refinement is taking place. And I think people are reflecting. I think they are being challenged, and I think things will change. But we have to wait and see. But I am optimistic. Okay,
thank you, Binna. Lieve and Anna. Anna, I'll come to you first. I mean, we've seen similar kind of protests in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement in Europe. Do Binna's observations around being quite hopeful, perhaps seeing more of that kind of focus, do you see that echoed in Europe? And is that what you're seeing and experiencing? And what do you think that means for European universities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, I think it's a great point, and I think it kind of urges us to actually look at ourselves very closely. I think it urges us to have conversations that are actually international, that are transnational, that are, as I said before, intersectional as well and experiential. But only these kind of conversations can kind of help us, enable us more for each of the actors, for each of the, if I say so now, universities, to have an external view of themselves as well. And I would definitely agree with what Binna was saying. It's never us, right? It's always on the outside. So it's very important to take up this opportunity and kind of look at ourselves through the lens of what's going on internationally, and kind of invite others to have the discussions with us in order to be able to look at ourselves more closely and with more rigor and with more critical insight as well. So I hope we are doing that already as well.
Okay, thank you. Lieve, what do you see from a kind of an EU kind of perspective in terms of some of the debate and conversation around race?
It's not only a debate about race. I think that it's very interesting to see that the inclusion topic and diversity topic is getting to the core of discussions, not only at the European Commission, because that reflects what is happening in population. I think that the discussions around democracy, about academic freedom, about active citizenship, it has started already a few years ago. And we see that much reflected in the very recent Commission communications, the European education area, the digital education area, the European research area, the skills agenda. And you find back the term inclusive, innovative, interconnected and digital prepared higher education system, for example. But this is a vision that is of course expressed, that is now being seen by policymakers, but how is it in reality? And the report I referred to, the recent Eurydice report, shows that we are not at all there. And we could go through all the factors like race or women or other underrepresented groups, the importance of the background of parents is still very important. Mature students don't find a way to higher education, etc., etc. I do think that there is some work to be done, indeed, with experimentations, and that the challenges laying ahead of us is something that is also being taken up by EUTOPIA, by this European alliance. taking care of trying to include students from disadvantaged backgrounds, but also to look further than only to what we could call the traditional students, even that they are undergraduate, graduate, PhD, but also to students that have not had the possibility to enter higher education, to maybe look to more modular systems, to take account of prior learning, and to think about those individual learning journeys and how higher education can deal with that. We see that appearing, and like that I want to respond to all the underrepresented groups of any kind, race, but gender, age-related, economic or social-related. I think that is an issue. And you could say that 1 on 2 of the existing students today have difficulties, and maybe the COVID-19 has shown that also to the universities, that there are with many more to have difficulties than they thought. And then I'm not yet talking of all those that don't find a way, because the educational systems before higher education don't provide enough access. So it is a big issue at the moment that needs further reflection.
Okay. So am I also kind of hearing from you, Lieve, that it's important for us to take this kind of multidimensional approach, what we tend to call intersectionality as well, that we cannot just kind of focus on one issue, but actually we need to kind of take account of the different kind of dimensions. So race is one aspect. But do you think that there is a danger that sometimes by taking lots of multidimensional approach or an inclusive approach, sometimes people say that can then mask perhaps particular kind of groups, and I know that there's been a lot of conversation around, race in particular being masked by other inclusion issues, or being called inclusion, that somehow it gets left behind. What would your view on that be?
Well, my personal view, it's not an or, it's an and. You do need to take both. You need to look to specific challenges and blocking issues for specific groups. Otherwise, you can't get to action plans. But also to the more global, you need to maybe be bold and try to rethink how a higher education could look like. And one of my dreams is that we would really start to talk about lifelong learning institutions that do get very good connections with the educational systems before, but do have also the possibility to offer upskilling, reskilling, and maybe provide accessibility and possibilities for those who were dropouts. So the notion of a lifelong learning university, if you start to think about that and you say, I put the learner central, this has major implications. So it's not or, it's and, but I would like to think and to discuss a bit of that global vision. Mm-hmm. It's different from what exists now. So if we look in this and 10 or 20 years, are girls, little girls and boys that are now at early childcare or in primary education, that are the ones we should provide equal and equitable possibility to go into education and higher education, and to be there in an inclusive and very diverse environment.
Okay, so take an inclusive approach, that very long-term change, but also thinking about what's happening globally rather than just in Europe. I'm just going to kind of come back to that point, because I'm going to go to Binna actually, because I know, Binna, you're particularly interested in this, and you've done a lot of work in terms of balancing out that approach between having an inclusive approach or kind of focusing on specific diversity strands, whether it's race or gender. What would your advice be?
I think that when we have a conversation about race, it moves very quickly to being intersectionality, then it moves quickly to being inclusion, and then we forget we're talking about race. And it's kind of happening in this discussion as well, actually. Your question was about race, we move to intersectionality, we move to inclusion. And there are issues to do with race in every country. And I think there's and for the best of intentions, I think we're demonstrating the point that once we start talking about race, we quickly shift to talk about something else. We just need to hold the ground for a moment and just to understand exactly what the issues we are talking about, how we might resolve them before we move on to talk about something else. And then we say, actually, what are the commonalities here in terms of building an inclusive approach? So I think there have always been risks, actually, that some topics, race being one of them, that we just kind of assume it's done and dusted, it's sorted. It's actually an issue. It's actually an issue for Britain. It's an issue for America. It's not an issue for us over here. And we need to listen to the experiences of people who are colleagues, who are from minority groups, from students who are from minority groups, and collect that data, understand what they're saying, understand what they're experiencing, and then deal with that. Then listen to other students and staff as well in order to build this more inclusive approach.
Thank you, Binna. I think it is. I think it's difficult as kind of diversity and inclusion practitioners as well, kind of getting that balance right of kind of engaging a wide as audience as you possibly can, but actually not really losing the kind of focus on individual kind of strands and sometimes quite unique challenges as well. And I think, you know, that's why it's quite important that we do take that focus when we need to. And I think particularly at the moment, it's an issue which is a challenge for many organisations because that spotlight actually hasn't been there for quite some time. I'm going to kind of shift slightly into kind of looking at that kind of broader kind of perspective and actually how we kind of balance some of the different cultural and economic and political situations in different kind of countries. And I'll come back to you, Binna, with your kind of global experience. But I'm just going to kind of come to Anna, actually, because I know, Anna, you're kind of very active in many European and worldwide research networks, which are focused particularly around social work. So how do you think we can harness the different perspectives on conclusion and present something which everyone recognises, which is what we're trying to do as part of the Utopia project? We're kind of all governed by different legal and cultural frameworks, and this is something which has been very much of a kind of focus for us. What observations do you think you can share from the work that's been done so far in terms of how do we balance those different perspectives from the different European countries and understanding what it is that we're talking about when we talk about inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So coming from what I said before, that inclusion being kind of, or at least in my view, kind of a continuously changing concept that's being developed through a process that needs to be democratic and a process that needs to thrive on co-creation. And while this process is developed, while we're developing this process, the interim definitions need to be implemented in this way and tested in real life, as I said before, and subsequently again improved. And I think, so it's this kind of a vertical dialectic of improvement is at the same time, as I also, I think, mentioned before already, supported by the horizontal dimension, meaning involving a number of diverse voices that can contribute actually to this, to the view of it, to the definition of it. And I think this is what we are in a way aiming for and also hopefully accomplishing in the Utopia Alliance, meaning that we are trying to shape together, to shape a developing definition of inclusion that is based on the one side on the contextual conditions and frameworks of each of the partner institutions, on the varied educational and cultural traditions that we all have, on the lived experience of students and staff as well, and the theoretical insights from different research backgrounds coming from all these 6 partners. So, and then actually through all this, trying to find a common language and a transnational understanding of what these particular theories and practices mean. and therefore hopefully shaping a coherent definition of inclusion. So it's actually by bringing together very different voices. It's not trying to kind of make it more dispersed, but actually trying to see what's out there that's actually common and that can resonate with the lived experience of those that are impacted by the practices that we do have at the universities at the moment. So at the same time being abstract enough to kind of enable application in different contexts, but also to resonate with the lived experiences as well. And I think it's, and just very in a kind of a banal way, if I may say, but I think we are also learning so much from each other just in the small group that we have, just as I said before, creating and maintaining the conversations that we have. For example, to give Slovenia as an example, maybe. Slovenia is a very homogeneous country. It's ethnically totally homogeneous. And most of our students would say, for example, race is not an issue for us. There's only one race in Slovenia, so it's not an issue for us. But it's exactly because of that. It's a big issue. It's an enormous issue. We have to deal with it. We have to put it in the spotlight. So, and it's, again, having these transnational conversations with so many experiences and backgrounds coming in that we can actually start to develop our own understandings as well. Also very locally, I think, and I think we are kind of doing that in our alliance.
So, from your kind of observations so far, Anna, what would you say that you would be learning? You know, you described Slovenia as being a very homogenous kind of society, and therefore the kind of students and staff that you may be working with. What do you think your observations are from working with the other universities? What do you think you might learn and take back that would be helpful in broadening that understanding around inclusion?
Yeah, it's both actually the practices itself. So all of the best practices that actually have been developed elsewhere are working at the moment. So why not, you know, why should we kind of create new, you know, discoveries if there's something out there that we might want to try as well before, you know, and kind of see if it works here as well. So just practically from that perspective, which is also time-wise, resource-wise, maybe more optional, something that universities also like to think about, or the management of universities. So it's from that perspective, but just also broadening, again, having more of the voices of those who are impacted by how the universities work and live, having more diverse array of experiences and the background of it, meaning, you know, it's kind of, for example, the student body and the staff body of Ljubljana is a certain number and it's not large, but having conversations in the pool of 6 universities across Europe kind of makes us, you know, take the knowledge from a pool that's enormous. It's so many voices, so much experience behind that. So just also from that richness or the array of issues and points of departures that we can have, I think we are all being enriched by it.
Thank you. Lieve, just to kind of explore a little bit more about the different contexts that the EU countries are working in. So the European Commission recently presented a strategy on LGBT+ rights, which clearly is at odds with some EU governments, and I guess Poland might be an obvious example. How do you think that impacts on a model for a European university?
That's not an easy question. I think that the topic has been discussed, and there is a communication that came out is already a way forward. Don't forget that behind that, there were a lot of bodies and individuals really trying to put this issue, to have a dialogue and to put it on the agenda. And I think that on itself is very important. How it impacts on European university is that it really has to take into account as a system, because the university is an educational system, it has to look to solutions, to structure solutions to open up its education. And when I say structural, that is one of the problems, and you need indeed to test and to experiment, but it requires to think carefully, to investigate what are possible solutions through peer learning, by exchanging examples, what worked in this country, in another country. I am a strongly believer that in the educational area, member states are talking to each other and are exchanging good practices. And maybe it is a slow process, but it is changing the minds of the people involved in that dialogue and that exchange, and look to see, in Slovenia, they have tried this, or in Sweden or in Denmark, this was very successful. We have seen how migrants and foreign-born students, how different actions were accelerated, and they learned from each other, especially from those countries that were very taken by it. We certainly got a massive entry of students with those problems. And I think that impact, by seeing how some countries are dealing with it, to have that structured dialogue and to have then communications which are not always binding, but do change the mind shift, is very important. For EUTOPIA, the project itself, I think it has taken already a serious position to be inclusive. I think it's very important for the project to know what it means for them, and on which levels or which action points derive from that definition, because you can be inclusive by being more open, but can you be open on all levels? No, I think you need a steady, step-by-step, put priority action lines, but with a longer-term goal. So again, race, it is very important to have it included in the EUTOPIA project and its action plan, to have very concrete recommendations and to see how to do it. But next to race, there are the others, and they have to go to a global vision that changes a bit how our education has to function, because at the moment, it might be a bit too much of a silo. And if you keep the silo and the building like it is, and you don't change the way you travel through the building, or the people showing you the way through the building, or how the building is conceptualized, then it is very difficult to make a change. So what I want to say is, you have to think, you must have a vision about what does it mean to be an inclusive university or an inclusive alliance of universities. Do we have a shared understanding, and how do we absorb that understanding, and how we put it then in action plans and do it then step by step? It cannot be done in a day.
So for EUTOPIA, it's important to have that strong vision,
Yes.
but also perhaps to share then its practices once it's established, to actually maybe help other countries to have some of that shift around what may be kind of more culturally outside of what we're looking at right now. For example, you know, LGBT rights and perhaps gender issues, gender rights as well in other countries as well. That's a really kind of useful observation. Binna, I'm going to bring you back in here actually, because I know you work globally, you work with organizations that have a global kind of footprint. what can we learn from you and the work that you've done in terms of how global organizations bring together an understanding of inclusion? You know, how does that actually kind of work in practice, and what do you think, you know, we can kind of take away for that European university, the Utopia University that we're talking about, and how do those global organizations deal with intersectionality, whether it's faith and race, or whether it's around race and gender, you know, particularly where the legislation is very different? How do they navigate that?
Yeah, I think we've covered the points actually with some of the things that Anna said, the things that Lieve said, some of your summaries actually. I think you've covered the points. I mean, the organisations that do this well have a strong vision behind what they're trying to achieve, and they don't prescribe to every region in the world what they should be looking at. So there will be a global focus on gender, because everybody could. Most countries, or every country I've ever known, actually understands why there should be a focus on gender. But beyond that, you kind of say, well, what are the other factors that the organisation should be looking at? The best organisation, so we'll leave it up to you, wherever you are, to sort out what you think the main issues to do with inclusion and inequality are, without prescribing it. We won't even prescribe the language. I did come across an organisation actually, which was using British terms for ethnicity and applying them around the world, and they were shocked to find that these terms weren't widely, that the acronym BAME wasn't understood outside of the United Kingdom. So there's there's a lack of sensitivity there. Anna's point about co-creation, the points about vision, and then allowing people to do their own thing, things that Lieve was saying, but this point about co-creation that Anna keeps talking about, I think is critical. You don't sit at the center and just assume you know what the issues are that every single region in the world actually faces in terms of employment, because they are very different. So you kind of set the vision and a set of principles that we're going to work towards, and this is how we do work in this organization. This is kind of what inclusion means to us, but the actual details of the things you need to focus on, we will leave it to you to determine that. You need to report back on it, you need to be transparent, you need to be accountable, but we leave it to you to determine what you think the issues are in your own location, and that works well.
Okay, thank you, Binna. I'm just going to kind of throw a question out to the participants here in terms of what they find are some of the largest challenges of working in the higher education sector, and what they want to see changed in terms of achieving greater inclusion. So I'm just going to throw that out to the audience and see if they can kind of come back with some answers for us, or perhaps some other questions as well. So do kind of type away there and let us know if there's any questions you'd like to put to the panel. But I'd just like to kind of stay on this kind of topic at the moment around the differences and the challenges that throws up for you know, in a Utopia University, and one of the very practical things for us is, and I guess you're touching on this, Binna, is the kind of legal and general practice, you know, so the legislation can be different. And one of the things that diversity and inclusion practitioners will use to help them to both understand the situations they're dealing with, but also then to understand how effective they're being in terms of the interventions that are being made. And that's around around data collection. Now, we know that different countries have very different approaches to what data they can actually legally collect, and what's kind of culturally accepted and what isn't. And for a Utopia University, this is going to be one of our challenges. You know, how do we compare? How do we kind of work together to kind of understand the impact that we're having? So I'm just going to kind of go. Binna, you can comment on that, and I'm happy for Anna and Lieve to come in as well. But as we were talking, do you want to make a quick comment on that?
Yeah, it's yeah, the data, and obviously in some countries it's not lawful to collect ethnicity data, and I think we just need to recognise there's only one form of data in itself. there are lots of other forms of data that we can be collecting to tell us whether we're being inclusive or not. So the data in terms of demographics gives us a number, but you can also back to this point about lived experiences, which Lieve and Anna's been talking about. We can conduct interviews with staff, with students. We can do focus groups with staff and with students, with the communities who are joining the university, who are not joining. So actually that's data, but we can also look at staff survey data to see what that's telling. So we can actually look at our policies, our processes, irrespective of the legal framework. We're talking about sharing. I think you were summing it up a moment ago, Kulbir, kind of saying we can actually take best practice of different countries. We can actually do comparisons about who's following those processes. So I think it's just a fact. You can collect the data in some countries, you can't collect it in others. On the other hand, we need to say, and there's lots of other data we could be collecting as well, and which is perfectly permissible. It's a different type, but there's lots of other things. And instead of focusing on the thing that we can't collect and make comparisons on, let's look at all the other things we can do.
Oh, thank you. I like that answer. So we need to think differently. Anna, I'm going to bring you in here because obviously one of the things that as Utopia universities is that we've been looking at, how we can kind of really understand where different universities are in their journey. Anna, do you think that what other ways do you think we could be measuring the impact that we're having so far that can really play out across the whole of the kind of the 6 partners in terms of understanding the impact that we're having and the data that we want to collect and might be able to?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's the easiest to start with the numbers and the data we can collect in forms and so on. This is also how we started.
Are we too obsessed with them? Are we too obsessed with numbers?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, we kind of, us in the Alliance, I think we collected them, also to enable us to use them, to kind of push, because sometimes by the policymakers and by the, I don't know what kind of managers, it's easier to kind of accept if you come with the so-called hard data. But I would definitely what Binna just now said, I think it's so true. We can collect this in different ways, and what was also mentioned, it's about principles, it's about the culture, and we can try to understand what the culture is and how we can nurture a better kind of inclusive culture in each of the universities or across them or in whatever other ways. And I think this goes also beyond just saying, okay, this is the legal framework that we have, this is, our hands are tied, we can only do so much. But we can do a lot more in the culture. I think Binna gave an excellent example of, how internationally the companies work in terms of you do your own thing because these are the values that we want to follow. These are the principles that we want to support. So how will you, in your particular context, make sure that these values are being followed and lived in your institution, in your company? How do you nurture that kind of culture? So I think here is where we can do so much, even if there are some other constraints out there. But things can be changed, I think. I'm hopeful in that way.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, kind of going back to some of your international work, Anna, do you feel that there are certain practices that kind of might stand out to you that do actually help people to kind of overcome some of those different cultural practices?
Yeah, as I said, I think it's very helpful to have the discussions and reflections and kind of scrutinize kind of the local practices via also the kind of global, I don't know, experience, developments, values. And I think it is helpful to come from the point of values, because I think values connect very strongly also with emotions. Values are something that we can kind of universally, sometimes it's more easy to understand what respect means than through defining it in a legal paper. So I think, but we need to have the conversations. We shouldn't, do the work each behind our own closed doors, but actually have conversations about it continuously. And I think from that point, we can all kind of thrive as well.
Yeah, thank you. Lieve, do you think we can kind of stop focusing so much on the data piece and actually really look to kind of some of the softer, perhaps, measures of inclusion, and actually think about doing this differently? And have you come across any examples that you think you might share with us?
I'm not going to say that monitoring of the data and data collection isn't important. It is on itself a huge research domain that should progress, and work has to take place, because evidence-based policy making is very important and must be based on data. Now, there is already quite some work done, and so I leave that aside at the moment. What I do find important is that we could be able to track or to record or to understand better the individual trajectories of learners. I deliberately am not using the term students, but it's the same for higher education students. When did they come in? How did they come in? How do they process? What were the difficulties with accessing? Where are they coming from? And we know from the research, but also from practice, that it are the transition stages that are blocking individuals. So I think it's very important to have a notion of those trajectories. And then, as a university, which is a system, which is an institution, to concretely respond to those messages and those challenges and those blockages. And I would have liked to hear some of the participants, but if I'm also a lecturer and with adult learners, with international students, and during the COVID-19, I've spent quite a lot of time listening or helping them, supporting them. And what you hear from them is that having a buddy system of somebody at the university was there, people who help them to have a more modular approach. Budget, of course, money, working students, 1 or 2 needs some extra income in order to survive. The problem, however, to postpone. That are the real issues for those students and those learners. And that's maybe not always reflected in the data. I mean, we do know that mobility is not for the ones who have not a huge income. So there, the blended or the online virtual mobility is an answer, but it's not, like we all have experienced, it's not enough. Also, the face-to-face should be brought in. So what do we do about that? And in EUTOPIA project, if you take up that challenge of connecting and building environments where across 6 universities you are going to develop learning units and connected learning communities, how do you do it in such a way that it is inclusive and not limited to those who find a way? So there is a huge system response needed, but for me, you have to go to the concrete situation of the University, Ljubljana, in Brussels, in Barcelona, and to see what happens there and what are the concrete things, and that you can ask to the students. I think they have quite some answers, or at least ideas.
I think you bring up a very important point, actually, and I was going to ask you the question that I think all of us would agree that what has happened under COVID-19 is that it's really shone a light on inequality and not inclusion. And certainly for those of us who kind of work in universities, it's kind of really highlighted inequalities. And I guess we can think about, you know, what are the things that, you know, that we have learned during this period that we will kind of take through post-COVID with us, which will benefit greater inclusion. Did you want to kind of comment on that, Lieve?
Yeah, I was looking into a question that came in. Can you repeat the last?
Oh, so I was just saying, you know, what would it be the most significant thing, do you think, that we will have learned from COVID-19 in terms of the practices that we've had to change? What would you take forward?
That we should do everything not to lose some students. We are losing students. And the second thing is that I specialize myself on innovative learning through technologies. It's clear that technologies are not an answer to everything. We knew that. But it's clear that the infrastructure for some students is not yet there. It's not only the digital divide in digital competences, we worked a lot on that, but also on the digital infrastructure. And it's a matter of accessibility, of having it available to them, and not being with 4 students, international students in one room, and not be able to have all those chats. I thought that our students in higher education were very digital and digital savvy. They are not all of them. And then we lose also students, and we don't know why. And that has often to do with with those exclusion components, that they have problems of surviving, problems of having a buddy, problems of talking to peers, losing their peers, having to disappear a while, and then so for me that is an issue.
So an issue in terms of so perhaps we've made assumptions about actually perhaps how digitally savvy all of our students are, and there's something for us to learn from that. Binna, if you were going to take one thing away that we've learned, or practices that we've changed in terms of COVID-19 that have actually led to greater inclusion, what might that be? Oh, I think we've lost Binna. Anna.
I'm on mute. Sorry,
oh, you're on mute. Sorry. Yes, go ahead, Binna.
I think it's this. I think the lesson would be for me is that we are actually having very meaningful conversations about inclusion and about diversity, and about what it means, what this pandemic has meant in terms of how we create an inclusive environment, how we can ensure that everybody stays engaged, and that's been the most positive thing for me. The fact that we're having these conversations now, once all the vaccines are in place and we start returning to the way we were before, I would like to see the kind of intensity of conversation and the exchange of ideas that we're having now continuing.
Thank you. Anna.
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, because I think we all had kind of a sense of, oh, you know, anybody can, you know, online. So it's so democratic, right? It's just, you just tune in and it's so democratic. And we've seen it's not, and it's actually the differences, the inequities have been deepened during this time. So yeah, I would also hope that this is what we take from it, kind of to keep to have some lessons learned, and to actually to do something about that in the future. But I also think, Kulbir, we have a question in the question and answer section, and I think it's a very good question. So maybe
I can't actually see the questions for some reason.
From Jotty Mystery, it's kind of talking about we were sharing, you know, the vision, the mission, and all this kind of, but have a discussion about the kind of the pushbacks and the obstacles that are presented by people. I hope I've summed that up correctly.
Yes, no, thank you, Binna. I mean, I'm going to have to kind of sum up actually as we're getting towards the end of our hour, but it seems to me that one of the things that's coming out of the conversation that we've had, that even though there are kind of differences in terms of politics and culture of different countries where we're operating, that actually the Utopia project is actually an opportunity for us to have these wider conversations and actually find a way of kind of listening to very, very different voices and bringing some understanding together, which is very much based around, I like the idea that it's based around principles or values, actually. So what are the kind of common things and visions that we share, and having a strong vision for, you know, a Utopia University, and actually by having something which is inclusive and has a strong vision that we can actually influence in a wider kind of societal context, and you know, across to other countries perhaps who aren't necessarily participating in the project, but there may be things that we can share and learn from together. So I'd really like to thank our panelists. So, you know, if we could applaud you, we would, but our audience is on silence, so we're not able to do that. But Binna, Lieve and Anna, thank you so much for giving up your time today. It's been really, really interesting to hear your views, very diverse, of course, but that's what it's all about. And it's about kind of bringing some of that together and thinking about what can we take away from it that's going to be really helpful. And I think we can all agree that there's much for us to kind of ponder on and reflect on and take back. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you for being a wonderful panel, and thank you for our audience as well for joining us. I don't know if there's an email, whether you can email further questions, perhaps there is, and we'll come back to you. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.